The morning I blocked the east access lane, 26 cars were backed up before sunrise. 3 residents were already filming. A delivery driver was arguing with someone on speakerphone. 2 parents stood beside their SUVs trying to explain to their kids why they might be late for school. Nobody understood what was happening. They only knew the lane was closed, and in Willow Creek, things like that weren't supposed to happen. The East Lane wasn't the neighborhood entrance. It wasn't a major road. Most people barely thought of it. That was all it said. No explanation, no HOA logo, no timetable. Just 5 words. 5 words that had somehow brought an entire neighborhood to a standstill. A silver Lexus pulled out of the growing line of cars and rolled toward the front. The driver's door opened. Marissa Kane stepped out, president of the Willow Creek HOA. Tailored blaze. She walked straight toward the barricade without looking at the crowd gathering behind her. Most people would have looked at the residents first. Marissa looked only at me. "Mr. Hale," she said. Calm voice, boardroom voice, the voice she used whenever she wanted a room to remember who was in charge. "I was told you closed the lane." I did. Phones lifted. People moved closer. Nobody wanted to leave now. Something was happening. Misunderstanding. I had heard that word before. A contractor used it 4 days earlier when I asked why orange survey stakes had appeared behind several homes. A county employee used it when I asked why 2 property maps showed different boundary lines. Now Marissa was using it too. Different people, same answer. "This can be resolved through the proper process," she continued. Proper process. Another familiar phrase. The contractor used it, the county used it, now Marissa was using it. At the time, I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. I only knew the same words kept appearing in places they shouldn't. Behind her, a resident raised his hand. "Can somebody explain what's going on?" Marissa didn't even turn around. "We're handling it." That was her answer. Not "we'll explain," not "here's what's happening," just "we're handling it." The man frowned. What does that even mean? No answer. Marissa kept her eyes on me. A woman stepped off the sidewalk. "Is this about the boundary update?" For the first time, something shifted. Only slightly. A tightening around Marissa's eyes. Gone a second later. "There is no boundary update," she said. "Only routine clarification." Routine clarification. The same phrase from the HOA email. The same phrase from a contractor work order. The same phrase I'd heard twice already that week. Nobody ever explained what it meant. They just kept repeating it, as if repetition was supposed to replace an explanation. The line of vehicles grew longer. Someone honked. Someone shouted that they needed to get to work. Another resident asked why the HOA was involved at all. Why was the HOA involved? Why were contractors suddenly measuring fences? Why were survey stakes appearing behind homes? Why did every conversation seem to end the moment someone asked for details? A county deputy pulled up and parked near the curb. That got everyone's attention, including Marissa's. She watched Deputy Carla Ruiz step out of her vehicle. Then she looked back at me. Why is law enforcement here? Good question. A week earlier, I would have asked the same thing. Back when I thought this was a paperwork issue. Back when I thought there was a simple explanation. Back when I believed... Even now, thinking about it made my stomach tighten. Because none of it made sense. Not the folder, not the filing date, not the reactions. Nothing. A resident near the front of the crowd spoke up. "What document are we talking about?" That question spread fast. People started repeating it. "What document? What did you find? What's being reviewed?" For the first time that morning, the crowd stopped caring about the lane. Now they cared about the document. So did I. Not because I understood it, because I didn't. That was the problem. I knew what was written on the pages, not what it meant. The more questions I asked, the worse the answers got. Marissa must have sensed the mood changing. Residents were no longer annoyed. Now, they were curious. Curious people are dangerous, especially when official answers stop making sense. "Everyone, please remain calm," she said. "The board is reviewing the matter." The board. Always the board. Not the county, not the surveyors, not the homeowners. The board. As if the board could decide reality by majority vote. A woman folded her arms. "My fence got marked last week." Another resident nodded. "They marked mine too. Someone measured my backyard. I got a notice about a setback issue." The comments came one after another. Small things. Separate things. At least they had seemed separate at first. Now I wasn't so sure. Marissa raised her voice slightly. "Please stop spreading incomplete information." Incomplete information. Another phrase. Another familiar answer. Another explanation that explained nothing. The wind moved through the cul-de-sac. Nobody left. Nobody stopped recording. Nobody stopped asking questions. And standing there behind the barricade, I realized something. The lane wasn't the story. The arguments weren't the story. Even Marissa wasn't the story. The story was the archive box. Because 3 days earlier, I'd shown the document to a county employee. He looked at it, looked at the reference number, looked at it again. Then he said something I still couldn't explain. Something he refused to repeat when I asked him a second time. Our office never issued this. That should have solved everything. It didn't. It made everything worse. 3 days before I blocked the east access lane, I drove to the county records office for what should have been the easiest part of the entire week. I wanted a parcel map, nothing more, just a copy of the property record for Willow Creek. The clerk asked for my address, typed for a few seconds, clicked twice, then stopped. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She looked at the screen, then frowned. A printer started running behind the counter. One page, then another, then another. I watched the stack grow. So did she. Because I had asked for one map, not 3. She gathered the pages, stacked them neatly, then slid them across the counter. I looked down. 3 maps. Same neighborhood. Same streets. Different boundary lines. I pointed at the first, then the second, then the third. The lines didn't match, not even close. One version cut across a backyard. Another crossed a drainage easement. The newest version pushed straight through a row of fences. I looked up. Which one is correct? The clerk hesitated, then smiled. A careful smile. The kind people use when they don't want to answer a question. "They're currently being reconciled." I looked back at the maps. How can 3 different versions all be active? "They're under review." By who? "The appropriate parties." The answer sounded rehearsed, like she'd said it before. Maybe more than once. I tapped the newest map. When was this approved? Recently. Recently when? Within the current cycle. Cycle. Not month, not quarter, not year. Cycle. I pointed at the second map. "What about this one?" I stared at her. "What are you doing?" "That version isn't available." 5 seconds earlier it had been. Now it wasn't. I looked at the map as she moved it away. Something caught my eye. A thick red line, drawn by hand, not printed, marked. The line crossed 3 private properties. One had a swimming pool. Another had a detached garage. The third had a gazebo. Then the map disappeared behind the desk. Gone. I pointed toward it. "What does the red line mean?" The clerk didn't answer. I asked again. Nothing. The smile stayed. The answer never came. I picked up the remaining maps and stepped away from the counter. Halfway across the room, I heard a machine start running. I turned. The clerk was feeding the removed map into a shredder. Thin strips of paper disappeared into the blades. The red line vanished with them. She noticed me watching, then immediately looked away. The room suddenly felt different, less like a public records office, more like a place where people were trying not to make mistakes, talking quietly. The moment they saw me, they stopped. Immediately. One grabbed a folder. The other turned toward a filing cabinet. Neither looked at me. Neither left. They just waited. I held up the maps. Do these make sense to you? The older employee glanced down, then looked at me. Not the maps. Me. Like he was trying to figure out how much I already knew. Finally, he pointed toward the papers. Where did you get those? The front desk. The older employee looked at the younger one. The younger employee shifted uncomfortably. Then he asked a question that caught me completely off guard. Have you spoken with Marissa Kane? I blinked. What? The younger man immediately looked away. The older employee shot him a warning glance. A real one. The younger employee straightened up. Nobody said another word. The older employee picked up his folder and walked away. The younger one followed a second later. I stood there holding the maps, trying to understand why the president of the HOA had suddenly become... Then I noticed something through an open office door. A computer monitor. A property file. Willow Creek. I stopped walking. The screen displayed a parcel history log. Several revisions. Several entries. Then one line near the bottom. Status, pending review. I stepped closer. The employee at the desk noticed me and immediately minimized the screen. Gone. A second later, the office door closed. I never saw the record again. By then, people weren't acting nervous. They were acting... I walked back toward the front counter. That's when I saw the door. Record storage. Authorized access only. The clerk noticed me looking at it. For the first time all morning, her expression changed. The smile disappeared. Completely. I'd like to see the original Willow Creek file. The reaction was immediate. The clerk froze. One employee looked up. Another. I looked at the storage door. Then at the maps. Then at the people pretending not to watch me. 3 maps. 1 shredded. A red line through private property. A county employee asking about Marissa. A property file hidden the moment I saw it. And now an archive room nobody wanted me near. And they definitely don't make an entire office act like they're waiting for a question before it's asked. I still didn't know what was happening. Not exactly. But for the first time, I was sure of something. The county already knew. And whatever they knew, they didn't want anyone else finding it. Not yet. The day after my second visit to the county records office, I went back. Not because I expected answers, because I couldn't stop thinking about the archive room, the file, the sign-in sheet, the shredded map. Most of all, the shredded map. People don't destroy things that don't matter. And that map had disappeared too quickly, like someone had been waiting for an excuse to get rid of it. The same clerk was behind the counter when I walked in. The same forced smile, the same careful voice, the same expression people wear when they've already been told how a conversation is supposed to go. "Back again?" she asked. "Just following up." She nodded, too quickly, then looked back at her monitor. Conversation over, at least on her side. I headed straight toward the records hallway, straight toward the storage room. The sign-in sheet was still hanging beside the door. Date, time, employee, file accessed. I scanned the entries. Willow Creek, parcel history. 7:42 a.m. MK. Then another. 8:03 a.m. JH. Then another. And another. 5 entries. 1 file. 1 morning. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. The reaction was immediate. The clerk looked up. "You can't photograph that." "Why not?" "It's internal." The same answer as yesterday. The same shield. The same wall. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. The photo was already saved. The clerk watched me for another second, then looked away. But she wasn't the only one watching. A door opened farther down the hallway. Footsteps. Sharp. Confident. Purposeful. I turned. Marissa Kane was walking toward me. Not toward the front desk. Not toward a county office. Toward me. For a moment, I actually wondered if I'd walked into the wrong building, because she didn't look like someone visiting a records office. She looked like someone arriving at a meeting. Blazer, portfolio, perfect posture, perfect confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from expecting every door to open. "Mr. Hale." She stopped beside the sign-in sheet. Not in front of me, beside me, like she belonged there. This is becoming a habit. I looked at her. This is a county building. I know. No explanation, no smile, just those 2 words. I glanced toward the clerk. The clerk immediately lowered her eyes. That bothered me more than Marissa's presence, because it wasn't respect. It looked like obedience. "The county asked the board to assist with several clarification matters," Marissa said. Clarification. There was that word again. Contractors used it. County employees used it. Marissa used it. Everyone seemed to have the same script. "Clarification of what?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly. "Historical boundary inconsistencies." The answer sounded prepared, polished, professional, and somehow completely empty. I pointed at the sign-in sheet. "Why is the Willow Creek file being accessed 5 times in one morning?" Her eyes moved to the sheet, then back to me. No surprise, no confusion, nothing, as if she'd already known it was there. "As I said," she replied, "the county is reviewing several records." 5 people reviewing the same file? She folded her arms. "The process is more complicated than you realize." That was the thing about Marissa. She never threatened, she never raised her voice, she never lost control. She just spoke as if every disagreement was evidence that someone else hadn't caught up yet. A county employee emerged from an office carrying a stack of folders. The moment he saw Marissa, he stopped. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough to notice. Marissa looked at him. "Are those Willow Creek files?" The employee nodded. "Yes." "Then they shouldn't be left in public view." The employee immediately turned around. No discussion, no hesitation, no explanation. Just obedience. I watched him disappear into an office, then looked back at Marissa. "Since when does the HOA supervise county records?" A tiny smile appeared. Not friendly, not amused. The kind of smile people use when they think they've already won. "We don't." "But everyone seems to listen when you speak." The smile disappeared. "Mr. Hale, you're seeing connections that aren't there." Maybe. But it didn't feel that way. Not anymore. Marissa glanced at her watch, then toward the storage room. For the first time since she'd arrived, something about her changed. Not fear, not concern. Awareness. Like she was checking on something. Or someone. Then she turned and walked away. Just like that. No goodbye, no explanation, no reason for being there in the first place. The moment she disappeared around the corner, I continued down the hallway, past the vending machines, past the empty chairs, toward the window overlooking the archive room. The room was occupied. A county employee sat at a table with a large file spread open in front of him. Not reading, studying. The way people study something that could cause problems. He unfolded a large map, then another section, then another. The map covered almost the entire table. And there it was, the red line. The same line I'd seen before. Only now I could finally see where it went. My stomach tightened, because it wasn't crossing empty land. It wasn't crossing drainage areas. It wasn't crossing unused space. It was crossing backyards. Real backyards. The Martins' pool sat directly on top of the line. Half the pool on one side, half on the other. A pergola belonging to another family sat across it. A detached workshop, a retaining wall, a patio, a storage shed. Years of improvements, years of work, years of money. All divided by a line that hadn't existed before. The employee stopped on one page and rubbed his forehead. Not confused, not surprised, worried. The look of someone who understood exactly what would happen if those lines became official. Then he closed the file. Fast. Too fast. He stood up immediately, picked up the folder, and carried it back to the filing cabinet. Not the drawer he'd opened. A different one. Lower. Older. A faded label sat on the front. Archive. Legacy hold. Legacy hold. I still didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't routine. Nothing about this felt routine anymore. The employee locked the drawer, checked the lock twice, then left the room. I stayed where I was, looking through the glass, looking at the cabinet, looking at that drawer, and thinking about the red line. For 2 days, I'd been trying to answer the same question. Who put the document in the archive box? Who filed it? Who moved it? Who hid it? Standing there, staring at that map, I realized I might have been asking the wrong question. Because the document wasn't the dangerous part. The line was. The pools, the fences, the patios, the workshops, the property people had spent years building. That was the real story. That was what somebody was trying to move. And suddenly, the mystery wasn't who put the document in the archive box. The mystery was why someone wanted those boundaries moved so badly. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. The morning after I saw the red line on the map, the contractors arrived before sunrise. 3 trucks, then 5. Then a 6th rolled into Willow Creek while most of the neighborhood was still asleep. No HOA logos, no county markings, just white pickups, orange vests, survey equipment, and a level of urgency that made no sense. One truck stopped near the retention pond, another near Briar Court, a third near the east access lane. Within minutes, workers were unloading tripods, laser levels, measuring wheels, and bundles of orange survey stakes. Hundreds of them, enough for an entire subdivision. I crossed the street toward the nearest crew. One worker was already driving a stake into the ground beside a gravel wash. Another was spraying orange paint along a stucco wall. What are you measuring? No answer. Alignment for what? Boundary consistency. I looked past him. More workers were spreading through the neighborhood. They weren't wandering. They already knew exactly where they were going. I followed the crew heading toward the Martins' backyard. The same property I'd seen on the map. The same swimming pool sitting directly on top of the red line. The workers opened the side gate and walked in. No knock, no homeowner present, no permission. One contractor sprayed a bright line across the gravel landscaping. A second worker dropped stakes beside the pool equipment. A third started measuring the fence. Mrs. Martin stepped outside wearing a robe. What is this? Nobody answered. You can't go back there. That's our backyard. Ma'am, we've already received authorization. Authorization from who? The board. By the time she stopped talking, 4 separate markers had been placed around her backyard. I followed another crew to a home with a detached casita. Orange paint appeared beside the walkway, then beside the irrigation controls, then beside the casita wall itself. What are those for? The homeowner asked. Review purposes. My mother lives there. The contractor made a note on his clipboard. No apology, just a note. Then he went back to measuring. Next house, RV gate marked. My trailer comes through there. That may change. Next house, shade structure marked, cactus garden marked, retaining wall marked. Every structure touching the path of the red line received paint, stakes, measurements, photographs, or all 4. The workers moved with the efficiency of people following a deadline. Not a survey, a deadline. Near noon, a county fleet truck arrived. The driver spoke briefly with the supervisor. They looked toward the east lane, then toward the homes that had already been marked, then toward their watches. The supervisor picked up his radio. We need Phase 1 completed by Friday. Phase 1. Friday. A schedule, a project, a deadline. Then a silver Lexus pulled up. Marissa Kane. She walked directly to the supervisor. How many are complete? 14. And the rest? We're moving as quickly as we can. Move faster. No discussion. No concern about the residents watching. Just those 2 words. Move faster. I looked across the subdivision. Pools. Casitas. RV gates. Retaining walls. Patios. Cactus gardens. Every property touched by the red line had been marked. Every homeowner was asking questions, and nobody was getting answers. The workers called them parcels. The county called them adjustments. The board called them clarifications. Standing there, watching orange paint spread across back. The next morning, the contractors came back with more trucks, 9 of them. White pickups along Briar Court, 2 more near the retention pond, another parked beside the east access lane. No HOA logos, no county markings, just orange vests, tripods, spray paint, and bundles of stakes stacked in truck beds like they were preparing to mark the entire subdivision. The next skipped property had an RV gate wide enough for a trailer. The red line crossed the driveway. Still nothing. No spray paint, no measurements, no clipboard notes. Then another, a clean backyard near the drainage channel, directly on the line. Untouched. That was when the question changed. It wasn't just why they were marking properties. It was why some properties were being protected. I walked up to the nearest supervisor. Why did you skip that house? He kept writing. Not part of today's scope. The red line crosses Phase 1. Again. What happens in Phase 2? He looked at me just long enough to make it clear I had asked the wrong person. I don't handle Phase 2. Then he walked away. No explanation, no warning, just gone. A few minutes later, a man from one of the skipped houses stepped outside. He looked confused. Are they coming back here? He asked. I don't know. They told us when we bought the place that nothing could ever be built behind this row. Said it was protected drainage land. Protected drainage land. That phrase stayed with me. Different houses, same story. The land behind... I drove back to the county records office. The clerk saw me walk in. Her face changed before I reached the counter. I slid the envelope toward her. Can you look these up? She didn't touch it. What are they? Addresses. I can see that. They were on the red line. Contractors skipped them. That got her attention. She looked toward the hallway, then back at the envelope. Those properties aren't part of the current review. Why not? I can't discuss that. Who can? No answer. I pointed at the first address. This one is on the same line as... The clerk finally picked up the envelope. Not to read it, to slide it back to me. You're asking about the wrong parcels. I stared at her. What does that mean? She lowered her voice. Mr. Hale, stop requesting maps. Then she walked away from the counter. Not to help another customer, not to make a copy. Away, like the conversation had become unsafe. Outside, a county fleet truck sat near the far curb. The same employee who had minimized the Willow Creek file. He stepped out and stayed beside the truck with the door open, like he wanted to leave fast. You need to stop bringing those... Before he could answer, a silver Lexus turned into the lot. Marissa Kane. Cyan blazer, sunglasses, portfolio under one arm. The county employee stepped back immediately. Go, he said quietly. Marissa parked 2 spaces away. She stepped out like she had not just ended a conversation by arriving. Mr. Hale, she said. Calm, polished, controlled. This is becoming unnecessary. I held up the envelope. Why are those properties being skipped? She glanced at it, not long enough to read the addresses. Those properties aren't part of the review. How do you know which ones I'm talking? Structured by who? The appropriate parties. The red line crosses those lots, I said. The red line is not the issue. That stopped me. Marissa adjusted her sunglasses. You keep treating this like a map problem. It is a map problem. No, she said. It's a planning problem. That afternoon, an envelope appeared under my front door. The houses they skipped were not random. They sat over the old wash, the one that had disappeared from the current map, the one Marissa called a planning problem. I turned the photocopy over. 3 words were written on the back. Not the map. Later that evening, I saw the same county employee parked near the retention pond. I walked up to the truck. You got the photo? He said. Was it you? What is phase 1? He stared through the windshield toward the pond. You keep asking about the homeowners. Because that's who they're affecting. He shook his head. That's not who this started with. Then who? He looked toward Willow Creek. The people who owned this land before Willow Creek existed. A second later, he put the truck in gear and drove away. That night, Willow Creek didn't feel like a neighborhood anymore. It felt like a place waiting for bad news. Porch lights stayed on later than usual. People stood in driveways long after sunset. Neighbors who barely knew each other were suddenly talking, comparing notes, comparing letters, comparing rumors. Nobody knew what was happening, but everyone could feel something moving beneath the surface. Something bigger than fences. Something bigger than the red line. I couldn't stop thinking about what the county employee had said. The people who owned this land before Willow Creek existed. The sentence kept replaying in my head. The next morning, I went to the HOA administrative building behind the tennis courts. The lights were already on. Marissa was inside, alone, standing over a table covered in binders, maps, and engineering reports. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked expectant. Mr. Hale. Calm, polished, prepared. What is phase 1? I asked. She closed a folder carefully. Phase 1 is a preliminary assessment. The contractors disagree. They aren't authorized to discuss the process. Then who is? The board. I almost laughed. The board doesn't know anything. Her expression didn't change. Then perhaps you're... I stepped closer. Why are some properties being skipped? Because they're not part of the review. The review of what? No answer. I pointed toward the binders. What are those? She hesitated, then pulled one binder from the stack and placed it in front of me. Original Willow Creek Development Plan. The binder looked old. I opened it. Hand-drawn maps, engineering notes, drainage studies, environmental reviews. Then I saw it. The wash. The same wash from the aerial photograph. It ran directly through. What is this? Marissa didn't answer immediately. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. Recognition. I tapped the page. What is it? A revision request. Approved? She didn't answer. I looked closer. Dates appeared again and again. Not random. Never random. Why is that date everywhere? Marissa stared at the table. Because why are these here? I asked. She crossed her arms, looking suddenly tired. People keep focusing on property lines. Shouldn't they? No, the answer came instantly. Then what should they focus on? She paused, too long. Finally, what happens when lenders start asking questions? What happens if this becomes public? Marissa finally looked at me directly. The expression on her face told me I was finally asking the right question. People should be careful what they wish to uncover. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. I stared at her. How many homes are affected? Another pause. Too long. More than you think. My mouth went dry. 30 homes? 40? 50? I didn't know. And neither apparently did most of the residents. I looked back at the binder, then at Marissa. Are you running this? She glanced out the window toward the neighborhood. If I was running this, she said quietly. That answer scared me more than any answer she'd given before. It wasn't a denial. It was something else. I closed the binder slowly. Then, who's really in charge? Marissa walked to the door, stopped, and looked back. You think the HOA owns Willow Creek? A pause. They don't. With that, she walked out, leaving me alone with the binders, the maps, the flood reports, and a new realization. The contractors weren't protecting boundaries. The county wasn't protecting records. The board wasn't protecting homeowners. They were protecting something else. Something tied to the land. Something tied to money. I didn't go back to the county the next morning. I went to the retention pond. By then, the pond had become the center of everything. The trucks, the contractors, the skipped properties, the red line. Every road seemed to lead back there. The contractors were already on site when I arrived, but they weren't working. That was the first thing I noticed. No spray paint, no measuring wheels, no new stakes, just crews standing around their trucks, waiting. A line of white pickups sat along the gravel access road, engines idling, tailgates down, coffee cups balanced on clipboards. The contractors, the skipped properties, the red line. Every road seemed to lead back there. The contractors were already on site when I arrived, but they weren't working. That was the first thing I noticed. No spray paint, no measuring wheels, no new stakes. Just crews standing around their trucks, waiting. A line of white pickups sat along the gravel access road, engines idling, tailgates down, coffee cups balanced on clipboards. Nobody looked busy. They looked delayed, like something had interrupted the schedule, like somebody higher up had pressed pause. A new set of vehicles sat beside the pond, 3 white SUVs. No company logos, no county markings, no HOA decals. just tinted windows and out-of-state plates. The kind of vehicles that appeared when lawyers, consultants, engineers, or insurance investigators got involved. Not random. Never random. I stood near the edge of the pond and watched them. One man carried a tablet. Another carried rolled plans. A third spent 10 minutes staring at the water without speaking to anyone. That bothered me. Not because I knew who they were, but because nobody else seemed surprised they were there. The contractors noticed them. The county employees noticed them. Even Marissa's silver Lexus was parked outside the administrative office. Again, third day in a row. Everyone seemed to know something. Everyone except the homeowners. By mid-morning, the neighborhood started changing. Not physically. Emotionally. Groups of residents formed at the ends of driveways. People stood in circles reading documents, comparing pages, comparing addresses. A man near Briar Court folded the same letter 3 times before putting it back in the envelope. A woman kept refreshing her banking app while talking to her neighbor. Another resident stood beside his mailbox, staring at a document he clearly didn't understand. Nobody looked angry. Not yet. They looked worried. Worried was worse. I crossed the street and noticed the same phrase appearing on multiple pages. Review, assessment, verification. Different documents, same language. The words were clean, professional, harmless, but nobody receiving them looked reassured. A homeowner standing beside an RV gate finally said what everyone else seemed afraid to say. Another resident nodded, then another, then another. Calls, questions, requests for documentation. Nobody seemed to know exactly why, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. The red line, the skipped properties, the pond, the lenders. Everything was starting to connect. I walked back toward the retention pond. The ground behind it sloped downward. Barely. Most people would never notice it. I hadn't noticed it either. Not at first. But once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. The shape cut through the subdivision in a long, shallow curve, past fences, past pools. I stopped beside one of the survey stakes, then another, then another. None followed property lines. None followed fences. None followed lot boundaries. The pattern was wrong. That was the moment something clicked. The red line wasn't following ownership. It was following geography. Not a boundary, a footprint. I looked back toward the homes. The skipped properties suddenly felt different. Not protected, not favored. Important. Important for reasons nobody wanted to explain. A contractor walked past carrying a stack of forms. One page slipped loose, only for a second, but it was enough. I caught 3 words before he grabbed it. Flood review area. My stomach tightened. Not because I understood exactly what it meant, because I understood enough. Flood. That word alone could change everything. Insurance, financing, property values, resale disclosures. The entire neighborhood seemed to shift in my mind. Not physically, financially. A pool was still a pool. A patio was still a patio. A house was still a house. Until somebody decided it wasn't. The white SUVs finally left around noon, one after another. Nobody waved, nobody followed, nobody seemed relieved. If anything, the mood got worse after they were gone. Like the real conversation had happened behind closed doors. And homeowner... A county employee arrived shortly after. The same one I'd seen before. The same one who always seemed to know more than he wanted to admit. This time he didn't stop. Didn't wave. Didn't approach. He simply looked toward the pond. then toward the subdivision, then toward the growing groups of residents holding letters. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. Like events were unfolding exactly the way he expected. A few minutes later, a contractor removed a small marker from the ground. Then another. Then another. Not many. Just enough to matter. I watched carefully. Every removed marker came from a skipped property. Every single one. Not random. Never random. The pieces were moving. The problem was that I still couldn't see the entire board. The red line wasn't a property line. It wasn't a survey correction. It wasn't even the project. It was evidence. Evidence that something had existed before Willow Creek. Evidence that somebody had tried to erase it. Evidence that the land itself refused to cooperate. I looked toward the retention pond one last time. Toward the contractors, toward the SUVs that had already disappeared, toward the houses receiving lender calls, toward the skipped properties sitting directly over the old wash. Then a question hit me. Hard. Not who removed the wash, not who moved the maps, not even who controlled Marissa. Those questions suddenly felt too small. The real question was different. If the truth about the wash became public, if the lenders learned everything, if the insurance companies learned everything, if buyers learned everything, who stood to lose the most? And more importantly, who stood to gain if it stayed hidden? By the next morning, Willow Creek wasn't quiet. It was vibrating. Not from trucks, not from construction, from people. Residents stood at the ends of driveways, holding letters, holding phones, holding documents they hadn't looked at in years. Nobody was pretending anymore. The first crowd formed on Briar Court, then another, then another. Small groups became larger ones. Questions became conversations. Conversations became conclusions. The same words kept appearing. Insurance, lender, flood, review. Same fear. A man stood beside his mailbox, reading the same page over and over. A woman refreshed her banking app 3 times in less than a minute. Another resident walked out of his garage carrying a folder thick enough to be mistaken for a legal file. Nobody looked angry. Not yet. They looked worried. Worried was worse. I walked toward the retention pond. The contractors were already there. Again. But they weren't working. The trucks sat where they had been the day before. Engines running, tailgates open, equipment untouched. Nobody measured. Nobody painted. Nobody marked anything. The work hadn't stopped. The work was waiting. 3 white SUVs remained near the pond. Tinted windows, out-of-state plates. No markings, no introductions, no explanations. One man carried a tablet. Another carried rolled plans. A third spent nearly 10 minutes staring at the ground without speaking to anyone. Not random. Never random. Across the street, a for sale sign disappeared. A realtor pulled it from the gravel yard, carried it to her trunk, closed the lid. Hard. People noticed. Of course they did. People always notice panic, especially when it arrives quietly. A man lowered his phone and stared at the empty patch of gravel where the sign had been. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. A few houses away, another resident closed his laptop and rubbed both hands across his face. Too slowly. Bad news doesn't need an announcement. It only needs recognition. By noon, the retention pond had become the center of Willow Creek. Not the clubhouse, not the HOA office, the pond. Residents gathered around it in loose circles, watching, studying, following the shallow depression behind it with their eyes. The same depression they had ignored for years. Now they couldn't stop seeing it. The curve, the slope, the path. A memory hidden beneath landscaping, gravel, fences, pools, and patios. One resident stepped forward, then another, then another. Nobody needed a survey map anymore. The land was showing them. A contractor carrying paperwork dropped a page, only for a second. Long enough. 3 words. Flood review area. He picked it up immediately. Too late. Several people had already seen it. Recognition spread through the crowd. Fast. Not understanding. Recognition. The kind that comes when fear finally finds a name. Insurance, lender, flood, review. Same fear. I looked around the neighborhood. Pools were still pools. Patios were still patios. Homes were still homes. For now. Something was wrong. Money noticed. The white SUVs finally began leaving. One after another. No statements. No explanations. No reassurance. Just brake lights and dust. The mood got worse after they were gone. Because people don't leave when nothing matters. A county employee arrived shortly afterward, the same one I'd seen before, the same one who always seemed to know more than he wanted to say. He stayed beside his truck, watching. Not surprise, recognition, like events were unfolding exactly as expected. Nearby, a contractor quietly removed a marker from the ground. Then another, then another. Not many, just enough. Every removed marker came from a skipped property. Every single one. Not random. Never random. The pieces were moving. The problem was that nobody could control them anymore. Marissa arrived a few minutes later. Silver Lexus, cyan blazer, sunglasses. But something had changed. She wasn't managing the situation. She was watching it. First time since this started. The crowd turned toward her. Not shouting, not demanding. Waiting. Waiting was worse. Questions can be managed. Silence cannot. Marissa looked at the pond, then at the residents, then at the letters in their hands, then at the empty space where the for sale sign had stood. A tell. Small, but visible. She knew exactly what had changed. The problem wasn't the red line anymore. The problem wasn't the wash. The problem wasn't even the contractors. The problem was disclosure. The problem was lenders. The problem was insurance. The problem was homeowners comparing notes. A voice rose from the crowd. Bank. Another. Insurance. Another. Disclosure. Another. Refinance. Same fear. Nobody needed the details anymore. The pattern was enough. Enough to understand that the board hadn't told them everything. Enough to understand that the county records weren't clean. Enough to understand that the land beneath Willow Creek had a history nobody wanted discussed. Phones appeared everywhere, not recording, calling. Banks, insurance agents, realtors, attorneys, neighbors. The story moved faster than any HOA meeting ever could. For weeks, somebody had controlled the order of discovery. Who saw the maps? Who received letters? Who got marked? Who got skipped? Who stayed quiet? That order was gone. Homeowners were comparing documents, comparing conversations, comparing answers, and realizing none of them matched. The county employee finally looked away from the crowd, toward the pond, toward the old path hidden beneath the neighborhood, then back toward Willow Creek. The problem isn't the wash. He said it quietly, almost to himself. Nobody heard him except me. The problem is what happens when everyone learns about it at the same time. I looked back toward the crowd, toward the letters, toward the phone calls, toward the fear spreading from driveway to driveway. For weeks, someone had tried to contain the truth. Not the maps, not the documents, the timing. That morning, they failed. Not because the records surfaced, not because the red line surfaced, because the homeowners finally started talking to each other. And once that happened, nobody controlled the story anymore. The truth stopped being a document. It became a crowd. By late afternoon, Willow Creek had changed. Not physically, structurally. People weren't standing in driveways anymore. They were moving, crossing streets, comparing letters, comparing lender calls, comparing answers. The subdivision wasn't a collection of parcels anymore. It was a network. Information moved faster than contractors, faster than HOA meetings, faster than anything the board could manage. The truth had momentum now, and momentum doesn't stop. She stood near the retention pond, watching the neighborhood reorganize itself around a single realization. They had never been told the whole story. The contractors weren't working anymore. Nobody was. The work was finished. Now everyone was waiting for the same thing: confirmation. I left the pond and drove back to the county records office. One last time. The parking lot was half empty. The building was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, nobody stopped me. Nobody asked why I was there. Nobody asked what I was looking for. That bothered me. Not resistance. Absence. Like the argument was already over. I walked past the front desk, past the hallway, past the storage room, toward the archive box. The same archive box. The same one nobody wanted to discuss. The same one that started everything. It was still there, waiting. Dust covered the lid. The tape along one corner had started to peel away. The label was faded, almost unreadable. I opened it. Maps, reviews, assessments, engineering reports. Everything I'd already seen. Then I found something different. One folder. Thin. Old. Darker than the others. The cardboard had water stains running along one edge. A yellow county sticker clung to the corner. Barely. The folder looked like it had been opened hundreds of times, then forgotten. I pulled it out. The tab had faded almost completely, but one line remained visible. Drainage easement agreement. I froze, not because I understood it, because everyone else seemed to. The county, the contractors, the lenders, the insurers, Marissa. All of them had reacted to the same thing. I opened the folder. The first page carried a red county stamp. Recorded. The ink had faded. The date hadn't. 21 years earlier. Before the roads. Before the houses. Before the retention pond. Before Willow Creek. I turned the page. Then another. The legal description followed the same path I'd been tracing for weeks. The same curve. The same depression. The same route, hidden beneath pools, patios, fences, and gravel landscaping. The wash. The original wash. Not gone, not erased, just buried beneath newer maps. I kept reading. Every attachment showed the same thing. Every revision. Every exhibit. Every reference. The corridor was there. Still there. Page after page. I turned another page, then another. Then I reached the release section. One box. Empty. One line. Empty. No signature, no recording number, no release recorded. I stared at it, then checked the next page. Nothing. The attachment. Nothing. Back to the release section. No release recorded. 4 words. That was it. Under Arizona law, a recorded easement doesn't disappear because people stop talking about it. It disappears when it's legally released. This one never was. I sat down slowly. Outside the window, dark monsoon clouds were building over the edge of Willow Creek. Still 12 days away. Still coming. For the first time since this started, every piece fit together. The skipped properties, the contractor activity, the lender reviews, the insurance questions, the flood notices, the red line. Everything pointed back to the same file. Not a mistake. A record. I turned to the final attachment. Development certification. Original approval package. Signature page. 4 signatures. In blue ink. Faded. More than 20 years old. And still binding. I stared at them. Not because I recognized the names, but because somebody had signed. Somebody had approved the project. Somebody had moved it forward, knowing this document existed. A chill ran through me. Somebody sold homes across that corridor. Somebody signed off on those homes. Somebody made millions before anybody started asking questions. The question I'd been carrying for weeks suddenly changed. Who stood to lose the most? Not the homeowners. They were discovering the problem. The people at risk were the ones who already knew. The ones who signed. The ones who approved. The ones who spent years hoping nobody reopened the file. Suddenly, Marissa made sense. The county made sense. The contractors made sense. None of them were the story. The document was. The easement was. The record was. Outside, phones were ringing across Willow Creek. Lenders, insurance agents, attorneys, realtors. Questions were spreading faster than answers. And for the first time, there was no version of events capable of stopping them. I closed the folder, looked one last time at the county stamp, then the signatures, then the empty release section. No release recorded. 4 words. That was the entire story. Not the wash, not the county, not the HOA. 4 words. And a file nobody was supposed to reopen. Outside, monsoon clouds continued gathering over the desert. Inside, the truth had finally arrived. Not as a rumor, not as a theory, not as a suspicion. As a record. And records don't care how long they've been ignored.